Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Joe Lynam. He's the president and head of business development for North, Central, and South America of Verrencey. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing is actually really innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. So I am a Bay Area native.
Okay, you're a rare breed.
One of rare breed. One of 9 crazy kids.
Wow.
Found my way off to Santa Clara University, so stayed local.
Okay, what did you take and why?
So I studied finance. Ended up with a degree in finance.
Okay.
In beer drinking and some marketing, and then jumped pretty quickly from there into just after my undergrad degree into the world of payments, and I've never left. It's like the mafia.
Awesome. So walk me through your career up until what you're currently doing today, because you've done a ton of stuff.
Yeah. So, the bulk of it, age myself here, but 20 plus years of obsession with startups and fintech before the term fintech was ever around. So,
sure.
I started, my first one was a company called VRS Billing Systems.
Okay.
And we grew that from zero to, back in that day, it was pretty nice. We grew to $40 million and about 65 employees.
Wow.
We sold that ultimately. Probably shouldn't have, but we sold that to AT&T.
Okay.
The whole team became part of AT&T as part of it.
Okay.
Really cool business. We developed, a carrier-based model that really was the alternative to credit cards for smaller transactions.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
So that a consumer could charge. Back in that day, there was even the landline phone carriers were had a utility bill out to every household. Well, that utility bill was highly efficient to add maybe 2 more, 3 more, 4 more transactions that were third-party transactions not owned by the carrier, right? So into my Pacific Bell bill, I can include another third-party transaction, if you will.
Okay, interesting.
And then we developed relationships with folks like Sprint, and we were the first to enable people like Sprint into the Pacific Bell bill, the GTE bill, the US West bill, and so forth.
Very
cool. It became an interesting model with sort of transactions into what's a pretty efficient bill.
Okay.
Versus third parties off going to create. Back then there was a company called MCI as well, creating their own bill, sending it off to people. And folks going, who's MCI? Maybe I'll switch to Sprint and save some money and get paid a $100 fee. So maybe I don't even pay this bill. So collectability of a sort of a less than branded bill into the household was always a challenge as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Because this was pre-online bill payment, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So we're talking late 80s. No, I'm sorry. We're talking mid 90s.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very much so. Okay.
Yep. And then into say around the early 2000s, I founded a company called Payment One.
Okay.
Fundamentally the same basic, solving for the same basic consumer pain point and fundamentally merchant pain point, which is the ability to buy things now that we had, online transactions and even mobile transactions. The ability to pay for it always really entailed a credit card. And think about two things. One is the carrier, if you're an AT&T customer or T-Mobile customer, whatever, the carrier's already underwritten you, right? They know what level of credit risk you are, right? They also have a inherent authentication channel to know that you are who you say you are, and so forth. So when you want to buy something with your phone and think of a small ticket item, a song, a game, a power up in a game, if you want to do that and have to pull out your credit card, that's really out of band, if you will, right?
Yeah,
that's
interesting.
A new financial institution trying to find out, am I worthy of credit? And it creates friction because the consumer has to pump in credit card digits and so forth. So what we created with Pay One was the ability to append these small little transactions into the carrier in a one-click model, right? So you can be playing World of Warcraft, and you can sort of power up, and you can buy it, and so forth, and you apply that transaction pretty seamlessly right into your T-Mobile bill and your Verizon bill and so forth.
So you were very, very early on in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And from there, I co-founded a company called Express Tap.
Sure.
Still on the board of Express Tap, and their Express Tap's interesting one, and what they're really about is turning everybody's mobile phone into an acceptance device. So think of name a company, maybe Square, who has their dongle.
Right.
So your phone, where it doesn't need the dongle, I can accept a consumer. They just tap their card to my phone.
Interesting.
And so you're powering, sort of democratizing that whole notion of who can be a merchant, right? I don't need a piece of hardware, separate piece of hardware to do that. There's significant implications around that. Certification challenges and so forth, and think of that as being more sort of market ready in areas like Australia, where everything is contactless.
Interesting.
So we're real active in Australia, which is where I met the folks at Verrencey.
Okay, so what are you doing at Verrencey, and walk us through coming on board with them?
Sure. So Verrencey was looking to expand outside of their initial markets. Their initial markets are really Australia, founded in Australia, but included the Mideast and Asia.
Okay.
And so they were looking for an ability to really launch in the U.S. along with Latin America.
Gotcha.
And I'd say Canada. I'd say Canada as well.
Okay.
And I just fell in love with just a brilliant founding team, and what they're up to is just phenomenal.
Okay.
So that was so I run, and I've got a small team. I run we call it the Americas.
Okay.
And that entails, the BD aspect. I mean, every aspect from setting up our operations here. We're headquartered here, our U.S. operation. So we've got a U.S. corporate entity headquartered in Sunnyvale. We're in a tech center here.
Nice.
A small little satellite office in San Francisco. And then we're all over the place in terms of hitting up, mainly issuing banks and processors all over the Americas. So all the way from up where you are, all the way to the tip of South America.
Okay, so how does that work? Like, walk me through how you work with payment providers and banks?
Sure. So maybe give you a bit on the solution.
Sure. Yeah, that works.
And then start to make sense. And our market is a little bit even unique compared to some other markets. But so what the company fundamentally does is they provide I'll call it a next generation fintech platform that's really geared to accelerate the innovation cycles for banks.
Okay.
Right. And this is something that is a common challenge from you name the market. Banks really struggle. They've got their legacy systems, which are it's a daunting task for them to be able to fully have a competitive capability set vis-a-vis everybody who's out to disrupt them.
Right.
When they have so much in the way of their legacy core that's taken on massive amounts of tuning and tweaking over the years, it has to be obviously compliant in every way, where disruptors start with a clean slate, right?
Yeah,
so right, so what Verrencey does, and if you think about it, banks are not just about competing with themselves anymore. They're also about competing, they're direct competitors, let's say. They're also about this whole new world of experiential competitors, I'll call them, right?
Okay.
So it's Santander and BBVA and Royal Bank of Canada, and you name the bank.
Right.
They used to think about how they could stack up to each other. Now they've got, Venmo, Apple, all these, right? And the world of who can race to provide consumers better experiences, it's a tough one for banks.
Sure.
Right. So the brilliant, founders at Verrencey, they live the world from both sides of that. And deep financial technologists, many years, senior positions inside of banks, but dealing with this and understanding the core challenge that the banks have, because they have the system that they have to maintain that's so robust, so secure, so compliant, so that's what Verrencey does. Is they've really cracked the code on an ability to help not only one bank or banks in one region, but banks globally, help them with a platform that sits off the side, but really taps in real time to every transaction that a consumer makes that's using their bank, right?
Sure.
Whether they're using it as it's tucked into Apple Pay or whether they're using their card. And so fundamentally what we do, and just boil it down to, or give you sort of the user experience view, you might be using a BBVA card, let's say.
Okay.
I won't suggest they're a client of ours, but I might just, or maybe more likely Royal Bank of Canada, right here in Canada.
Sure. Yeah.
So that card has so many limitations on things it can and can't do.
Right.
Even if it's tucked into a mobile wallet.
Okay.
With a Royal Bank of Canada on the Verrencey platform, we power that card, and I'll go technical for just a second.
Sure.
But when you make a transaction at a point of sale or you make it online, what happens is that transaction will go all the way through the card networks and so forth, all the way to the POS, and
Yeah.
we are connected real time at the switch, so we see the transaction and we let it happen as it normally would, but we create what we call a second leg transaction.
Okay.
Where we could impact that original transaction by think about discounting it down, right?
Okay.
Rounding it up, changing it completely. So it could be, Kevin, you just made this transaction. You could move it from that card to your points program.
Oh,
even though you already
interesting.
walked out of the store. You could be pushed a message that said, "Oh, did you realize you had an offer there? Would you like to apply it now?"
Interesting.
Right.
Very
Or,
cool.
and then I'll stretch it to where it gets really interesting. The banks, they struggle with creating programs for their consumers, because every time they create a new program, whether it's, big ones like their cash back and this and that, they don't know which consumers really want what sort of offers and what
Sure.
sort of cards, and they're figuring that out, and then they can offer like one or maybe two. So you'll see them pick the bank, right? Whether you say B of A, whoever, they
Sure. Yeah.
have their program. So even you look at their websites, their relationship with the consumer and their appeal to the consumer, they plays out in their credit card relationship, their debit card relationship, and what they can do for that consumer. We just blow that wide open because they can do things like, "Oh, I'm just going to issue you, consumer, a generic card, and you
Okay.
pick your own benefit. You pick your own benefits.
Very cool.
You might choose that you want your Netflix paid for free every month,
Right.
and you can gamify that. And if you do these certain behaviors, we're paying for your Netflix. You want your Amazon Prime paid for, yeah. That's a benefit you can have. Or you're a traveler, you want access to lounge. That's a benefit you can click off. And infinite combinations of things, because they don't have to worry about this stuff impacting their core. We do it off on a platform separate and independent. And then,
Interesting.
but we're connected in real time. So now we go off. So back to your question of, then what's, Joe's team go, what do they do? Then we go off and sell that wonderful capability with a few different sort of core thrusts, but we sell that capability to processors because they have tons of banks,
Right.
and it's where we connect at the processor.
Gotcha.
So think of folks like, the Fiservs, the WorldPays, the First
Sure.
Datas, that sort of thing. And by the way, other markets don't look like the U.S. They don't have processors in the middle. Some do, but many don't, right? So if you're in Australia and you're dealing with one, there's really four major banks in Australia.
Sure.
Those banks have their own systems, if you will, and they don't their own processing of their own transactions is typically an in-house thing, especially for all the larger ones. We are active with processors, we're active with issuers, and we obviously look at best ways in which to, hit a lot of them at aggregation points. And it plays out in the form, in terms of the capability they push out to their consumers, is their whole digital experience really lights up
Okay.
with the consumer.
Sure.
It's more reason for the consumer to use their bank's app. Oh, I can shift today and apply. I've got a lot of points. I want to pay with points. I'm just going to set that in my app real quick.
Right.
Because it's a complete rules engine of what we're enabling. So then they push that out to their consumers, and their consumers find that the app is something, it's a go-to thing for the bank, right? So it really drives a lot of their digital initiatives.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because I think at least, in Canada, there's only like a handful of major banks and then a bunch of credit unions. But in America, there's got to be, tens of thousands of banks? Is that fair to say?
So, yeah, it is fair to say. It's crazy. It's crazy. And some of them are, so Canada, you're right, it's very much like Australia, actually.
Yeah.
In so many ways, it's amazing, but and it's so different here, but the scale here is different too, right? So
Sure. Yeah,
you
that's
can
fair.
you think of credit unions being small, but Navy Federal Credit has something on the order of 6 or 7 million cardholders, right?
Right.
So they're not real small. They're almost as big as one of the top 4 in Australia.
Interesting.
But yes, you're right. There's tons of them.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, how does it work? So I, as a bank, sign up with you guys, and then you build my app and it's branded to my bank, or how does that work?
No, that's a good question. So we looked at, are we going to be in the app and UI business, right?
Sure.
And we're not.
Okay.
And most banks have sort of made their choice there.
Right.
So the way it really works is they're tapping into us.
Okay. Gotcha.
We're cloud based, and we set up instances of our service near all of our big utilization points.
Right.
And they're able to serve up our capability inside their app, inside their
Gotcha.
digital world with the consumer.
Okay. So the consumer never actually sees you guys then, right? Like in the app?
No, that's right. We're just the arms dealer there.
Okay. Interesting. No, I think that probably makes the absolute most sense, right? Because most banks want their brand, and I think the users of a bank want to see the bank's brand, and probably not yours, because if I launch an app and it's not my bank's logo, a lot of people would probably freak out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So go ahead. Sorry.
We won't ever play there. That's just
Right.
that's not our lane.
Sure. Makes sense. So then how do you guys monetize the platform? Are you charging per transaction? Are you charging a monthly fee, a bit of both, or walk us through that?
Yeah. So we don't clip every ticket.
Okay.
So we don't charge at the transaction level. That gets to be really, really tough model for banks and
Sure.
pass to merchants and so forth. It just doesn't. Ours is it's a subscription model based on the size of their portfolio that will power.
Got
right?
you. Okay.
And so annually, monthly, we've got our standard sort of pricing, but fundamentally that's how it works.
Right. And then if I'm a bank and I integrate with you guys, can I cherry pick the features I want and don't want? Is that fair to say, or how does that kind of work?
It's another really good question. I think the other thing maybe for me to explain is so I just touched on a few.
Sure.
But think about it. It extends all the way to these banks have at every look at any bank's website and you look at their basic set of services that they're offering to either businesses or consumers.
Yeah.
They're fundamentally they're all under attack, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's a deposit account, it's credit cards, and then you could throw out names like credit. Okay, there's Venmo's got a credit card now. Okay, well maybe it's their loans that are under attack the hardest. You got Lending Club and Affirm, and
Right.
or it's their investments. It's got Acorns and all this, right? In every one of those categories, they're just under attack, right?
Sure.
And what we do though, but if you think about that competitive battle, even as a consumer, I think of things always as a consumer first, and I go, okay, yeah, but am I really, if I have any level of significant deposits, do I want to put them with the neobank? I don't know. I can certainly see how that works for certain millennials and so forth. So banks still have this leg up in this area of they've got it nailed in terms of security for the most part. In terms of security, liquidity, there's not going to be some regulatory issue that just all of a sudden becomes such a challenge. I can't do things. My money's not going to be gone in the middle of the night. So and what you find, I think, in the way we say it is, the battle between the startups, right?
Yeah.
incumbents always comes down to whether the incumbents can understand and attack the innovation,
Right.
and provide the innovation before the startup can get distribution, right? So there's so many, right? And that's the battlefield. And what's happened is, there was so much investment going into fintech because there was such a belief that, well, these fintechs are going to kill the banks, and they got a lot of money put behind them.
Yeah.
And then there's marginal success, and you can talk about some great ones, and you see folks like Stripe and some of the others, right, which are obvious. But there's so much more that's clawing and attempting that can't get there, right?
Yeah, but you're basically a startup for the bank then. Is that a very simplified version of what you guys are doing basically?
It's also where we are with how what we provide to the bank. So we also provide to the bank and to the fintech startup. Think about the disruptors or the, would-be disruptors. We say, hey, look, we are a platform for the bank. And we are a fintech platform to help you with access to the bank so that your product can be served instead of your own brands like an Acorns or you name it, right? So think about the economies there. The bank goes, oh, one connection to Verrencey, and I get all these wonderful Verrencey direct capabilities, all of our native things I described to you. Plus, I get access. I can onboard these other fintechs, which would be a year-long cycle for me one by one.
Sure.
I got to go because many of them entail kind of this real-time connect into the bank, right? So those are difficult things for the bank and difficult things for startups to. So we're a platform, and we've got 30 plus really compelling. We're not this open API platform where everybody can jump on.
Sure.
It's only those that we know to be compelling to the banks.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's interesting because instead of them buying a bank going out and buying a bunch of startups to be innovative, they literally just pay you guys to handle that for them. Really?
Basically, yeah, absolutely. And then you're asking, can they tap into this feature or that feature? We're really a subscription model that fundamentally we've had to price some things differently for certain larger deals.
Sure.
But we basically say, look, you're paying a subscription fee, and it's all you can eat. It's not only all of our features, but it's every partner we have on the platform. And then the partners, the economics of the partner, we don't get in the middle of. If there's some, commercials to be had between the partner and our FI, we don't look to clip the ticket there either.
Okay. So give me an example of, so I'm a bank, I'm paying you guys, and I want to do something with one of the partners. How does that work? And maybe give us some concrete examples of a use case or a couple of use cases.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give you a good, fun example. There's a one of the capabilities is, I talked about our ability to discount transactions, and so there's a whole host of loyalty partners on our platforms, companies you might recognize, companies like Augio and so forth.
Yeah.
And then there's also that's rounding a transaction down, if you will, for the consumer.
Right.
What about rounding it up? Okay. Rounding it up means I'm feeling pretty good this month. Things have been pretty good, and I want to be charitable, right? So I want to round up to the nearest, and then our rules engine makes it extremely flexible as to how the bank can have their card work with the consumer and the app, right? So I said in the app, I'm going to round up to the nearest $5. I'm going to cap that at $50 per week, and I want it at these specific locations, or I want it across the board, every transaction I do.
Interesting.
And when I round up, I want it to go to, and then you pick it. The bank actually, business rules apply here, but you pick it. It could be one of 5,000 different charities. Well, we're not in the business of going to find the 5,000 charities. We have a partner. We have a series of partners. One's called, you have to be specific, one's called Good World.
Okay.
And theirs is really cool. And So what then the bank is able to push out to the consumer is the ability in a few clicks to set, I'm going to round up transaction. I could pick a favorite charity, and guess what? Mine's on there.
Sure.
And away we go. And it's that's simple.
Got you.
Now there's some obvious commercials between the charity platform and the bank, and we help facilitate all that, but we don't, there's no markup, if you will. So that's one example. Here's another interesting one that I love is,
Sure.
We have, so back to rounding up, I might want to round up to investments.
Sure.
In this case, the bank can choose from some of our partner offerings, which would be like, I'm going to do roundups and it's going to go to Acorns, right?
Right.
So the bank's actually participating in the consumer. They could offer their own products. As well, we have very interesting partners that are able to do things like fractional investing.
Oh.
So my son, for instance, in college still, he can't afford Amazon stock, right?
Sure.
But if he was to round up every one of his purchases and be buying fractionally Amazon stock, he thinks it's a cool thing, right?
Yeah. Very cool.
So there's all those things that it's very difficult for the bank to do these sort of things for themselves, versus we just bring this whole, plethora of capabilities to them that they can, and then we offer it in we got a nice way for them to dabble and test it. And then these are big, long cycles, sales cycles, but they're able to sort of trial things and then go from there. And I'd say that the reception is just incredible.
Yeah, I can imagine. I haven't specifically worked in like full time at a bank before, but I have a buddy that does, and it's interesting to hear him talk about just their struggle. He works on the UX team of their mobile apps, and it's interesting when I found out about you guys, I was like, oh, this is really quite interesting, because you're right. It's a long sales cycle. A lot of times they lack the dev team. They have a hard time finding people, and obviously outsourcing to a company is going to cost them a ton of money. And so finding something like you guys is actually a lifesaver for a lot of banks. Like, just speaking from talking to my buddy about the struggles that they go through, right? And it's actually really interesting what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and if you had to talk, to the CTO and so forth, or the CIO, they struggle with it so much that it's like, okay, if we're going to completely, if we're to really address this, we've got to start from fresh, and that's a massive investment, right?
Yeah.
We're talking
years, right?
Really years and $100 million like sort of big. All their switches, everything gets sort of modified and replaced with new next generation providers exist that offer some of that, but we're even finding there, right, with neobanks, we've got some of those as customers.
Interesting.
And so it's
well, even I think, and you can tell me if this is a bad example or not. I was doing something a couple years ago for some insurance company. I won't name them. It doesn't really matter. But their internal team, they were talking about implementing Touch ID using the fingerprint scanner on the iPhone. And forget about Android because it doesn't really matter for the example. But let's just say adding it to iPhone. They were like, well, that's going to be a 1.5 year development cycle to add it to the iPhone. And then, as we know, clearly Apple's moving away from the fingerprint scanner on the home button on the iPhone, right? And so they would have rolled it out almost a year after Apple basically killed it off, right? And so that's a pretty simple sideways example of what we're kind of talking about here, but I think that's a really good example of how long it takes to add something, and the chances of by the time they actually get to add it, it's already deprecated and doesn't even really exist anymore.
Yeah, totally. And you see that in fintech so much more than you see it in some other, you pick other forms of startup world, whether it's messaging or you name it, right? That just when you're talking about at the end of the day, it touches people's security and it touches their money and it touches their bank account. It's very different. That's why everybody goes, well, that should be, disrupted. It's just not highly efficient, and there's a better way to do it. And you could probably ask the Square founders that they succeeded, but they sure thought it was going to be a hell of a lot easier. Yeah. I mean, even in their world or that world, right, where you're saying, I'm creating a new payment methodology and I'm going to enable all these merchants to do things differently.
Yeah.
The moment you do that and you say, okay, a consumer's going to give me their contactless Apple Pay, or they're going to give me their card, or whether they're going to give me, everything that it touches has to be so certified it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You have to certify that device. It's why, you look at a company like that and how they launched and then rolled out. They had big inertia, but they were still only in 4 markets or 2 or 3 markets, and it's because it takes forever.
Yeah.
Interesting. And it's hugely expensive. Expensive too.
Yeah, very much so. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, in that example, just a little Square device, it's probably on the order of a couple $100,000 per card issuing. I'm sorry, per merchant acquiring bank. You think about all the banks.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and especially in the States, right? Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Yeah. I never thought of it like that.
All has to be pressure tested that way, right? So
So I'm curious then. You mentioned just a second ago about obviously rolling out new features is kind of where I'm getting at. How do you guys decide what to roll out? Because you could potentially mess up a bunch of things on your client's end, or maybe they don't like it, or how do you decide what new features to actually add to your guys' platform?
That's an awesome question. It's one we started with, and we're still pretty nascent, right? But companies, going on 3 years old. We just launched the Americas a year ago.
Okay.
But the great thing is it's so incredibly flexible, and what we built as in terms of the native capabilities, right? We built where we know there was sort of burning platform issues for banks.
Okay.
And we know they just have to solve these. These are areas, and some might say that sounds like a nice to have, but no, their competitors have it or are going to have it really quickly. It's a need to have.
Got you.
So it's a little bit of that, and then we're in the hallways of all the banks now, or all the
Sure.
I shouldn't say all of, right? But we're, and so
enough.
we hear enough of their pain points of, look, could we do this? How can we, give you a great example. So I think about this one. So I have a bunch of different cards because I love to test everything, right? So I have Citibank cards, and my wife has a Citibank card too. And I'm not no advertisement for Citibank. But they called me and said, we think there's been fraud, right? Please call back the 800 number. And I'm like, God, this is so easy to solve. But they called back and they said, we have a charge for $92.11 on your card.
Okay.
I said, okay, well, who's the and we don't know whether it's fraud or not, right?
Right.
I said, well, who's the merchant? Who's the merchant?
Yeah.
And it was CC and T something LLC Corp.
Okay.
I'm like, yeah, it sounds like fraud to me. Shut off my car. I never bought anything from CCT LLC Corp. Sounds bad.
Yeah.
And so there goes the expense of that call, $15-20 for that live rep, right?
Sure.
Whatever other technology behind it. There's the shipping of 2 new cards to the house,
right?
On them. when I got home, too late. But when I got home, I asked my wife. I go, yeah, geez, this card. It looked like there might have been fraud. $99.22. Was that you?
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, I was at Chevron.
Oh.
I filled up. That was at Chevron. Well, what that is the Chevron franchisor or whatever. They had set up their point of sale terminal and their whole setup through their merchant process.
Right.
They use their legal name as that LLC corp, right?
Interesting.
But think about these old antiquated systems. It carries that through the life of the transaction flow.
Yeah.
Well, we solve that. We have, again, another partner on our platform that's a data enrichment, and they know that CC&T blah 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 was really Chevron on Lawrence Expressway.
Got you. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So we feed that data back to the bank. The bank, throughout the cycle of the touch points with the consumer, it's now clear. Guess how much money that would have saved, right? Just that
Sure.
one instance.
Well,
right? So.
I heard, and I could be totally wrong, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, that in a lot of banks, their fraud department is almost half of their staff. Have you found that? Like, it's that big of a problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just banks. I mean, it's the FIs in general. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay. PayPal, a huge portion of PayPal staff, right?
Okay,
And
so-
Max Levchin was the mastermind originally, and
Right.
his whole team, they were so tilted towards, if we can't handle fraud, we can't handle anything, right? So we better be able to handle fraud,
Sure,
right?
but-
You can't,
Yeah.
you lose that end user trust because something goes wrong there.
Sure.
You lose all.
Yeah. But in your case, it wasn't fraud, right? Like, you just thought it was because of bad data at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
So we're bringing this back full circle to your question. You
Sure.
said, what else do you think about, what's next and everything else? So it's things like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what your imperative is to drive costs out of the equation. You've got and your call center cost, with these sort of items is significant. So here's a product, right, for you, and that,
Interesting.
So we've got, like I said, we've got 30 plus partners on the platform, probably 10 categories, and growing.
Right.
Of things that and we study them, and we try to make smart decisions as a senior leadership team to say, along with everybody else's input, as to what really is going to help move the needle for our clients.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it. It makes a lot of sense what you guys are building. I actually quite love what you guys are doing, actually, because the end user really doesn't ever know about you, but you're adding so much convenience and freedom to their bank, right? And you're kind of modernizing their bank without them even knowing.
Yep.
Interesting.
It was hard for me when I really figured out that it was approached by the Verrencey team and saw what they were up to, how they're up to, and how smart these guys are. It's unbelievable. And how they execute, right? So
Sure.
I couldn't pass up the opportunity, and I'm loving it.
No, that's very cool, man. So I'm curious. We got connected through Sarah at the Media Excellence Awards. Did you guys submit for an award, or what's your involvement with that this year? Yeah,
we did. We submitted for an award, and to be honest with you, I think there was a couple categories we might have been up for.
There's a few that you guys could have submitted for. So what made you decide to actually submit for the awards this year?
Well, I had been familiar with it,
Okay.
and from just prior ventures,
Sure.
always sort of in and around payments, and thought it was one we should submit for. So I engaged our marketing guys in Australia, and I think we're in a finalist position, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, you would be. No, very cool. So I'm curious though, you've been in the tech space for a long time, and you've obviously done a ton of stuff. what advice do you give people? Maybe good or bad advice, or sorry, not good or bad advice. Sorry. What advice do you give that people should and maybe shouldn't do that you kind of see maybe entrepreneurs make all the time?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things I would say that's maybe a more recent phenomenon is, it's so much easier now to start companies than it was 5, 7, 10 years ago,
Sure.
right? I mean, between mobile apps, between cloud, and not only that, but just the operational opportunities to go saddle up with accelerators. Find your way to free space, and you're able to bootstrap things differently. If I'm really talking to startups, and I do a bit of that, I mentor startups.
Sure, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and so the take advantage of all the resources that are out there.
Okay.
And folks aren't out to steal your ideas, or not.
Sure.
Don't need to be a lone ranger about it's not the sole founder teams are the only way to go, and so I would really get involved in an accelerator. I would take advantage of an accelerator, number one.
Interesting.
And I'd find an accelerator that is suited for you.
Okay.
And obviously different stages of start. I'm talking real early stage.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
What are your thoughts on people thinking they need to move to the Valley, considering you were born and raised in the Valley?
Well, it just depends on what you're up to, right?
Okay, sure.
I believe there has to be a power center. So, if you've got a financial technology company and you happen to be in Atlanta, it's not a bad place to be.
Got you.
Right. There's just a lot that's there. A lot of processors are there. A lot, it's just,
I see.
Right. If it's, depending, other forms of fintech, Boston's not a bad place. And New York's not a bad place.
Okay. So go where it's relevant to what you're doing.
Yeah. And much of that, it doesn't mean go like pack your bags, go find a place and live there immediately. You can go participate in the accelerator there. You might need to be there for 8 or 10 weeks or something.
Sure.
And then you'll get a feel for it too, because what happens as part of that is you'll get deal flow opportunities, and you'll see how vibrant is this. And if I'm not here, I'm missing all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going on in and around the vortex. If I'm in Boise, Idaho, or not to pick on Boise.
Sure.
I love Boise.
I got you. No, I think that's actually really good advice, right? Because I think more and more people either can't move, don't want to move, or whatever reason, right? But I do think you're right. If they might be more open to move to somewhere that's maybe a bit closer to home that gives them better opportunity, where if they're on the East Coast, potentially moving to Boston or Atlanta, if you're in the fintech space, is a lot easier than maybe going to the West Coast, right? No, that's interesting.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And there could be short little tour of duties where you can figure it out too.
Sure.
And I love the notion of, you don't have to be where the action is.
Interesting.
Because I just love to travel, and I love outdoorsy and everything else. So I love the ability to,
Sure.
I love the work from anywhere. But in terms of getting yourself established, there's just so much you can miss out on at the right stage, right? I mean, you're going to have, you're going to have your stages.
No, I think that's really good advice. Interesting. Well, Joe, we're coming to the end of the show, so let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about you guys and any other links you want to mention.
Sure. So we, Verrencey.com, Verrency. Our website's due for a refresh before long.
Okay.
But that's an easy way to get a hold of, depending on what market you're in. Our U.S. contact information is there as well. And we're I think 31 or 32 people and growing fairly rapidly in terms of the head count. But we're for that small number, we cover a lot of markets.
Sure. Yeah, that's huge. Very cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Awesome, Kevin. Thanks. Pleasure talking to you.
Thanks very much. Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.